Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, first part there for the 28th of December 2023. And it is still like the kind of holiday period for me, even though I'm self-employed and I don't get holidays. But family around and late nights, late mornings. I apologise that this is maybe an hour later than I would have liked it to have been. Nonetheless, here I am. Where should we start? Where we normally start, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. And you can find those caveats in the description to this video below. And I will say that these numbers are phenomenally high, again, in certain categories. So there will be the thought from many of you, but particularly from those more trollishly inclined, to say, well, how can they keep taking these many losses? They obviously aren't taking these losses because that would be ridiculous. So therefore, the Ukrainians are lying. But several things to say. One, I have seen so much footage of lost Russian equipment recently that I think they can take these losses. Two, Andrew Perpetua has also seen an incredible amount of that. So today's stats look like this, and they've looked like that for a good week now, I think. So you start adding that up on a daily basis, and they will only be a fraction of the actual stuff that has been lost as well. So there is evidence to suggest this is true. And the third point I want to make is that Russia just have huge stocks of this stuff, which is why they are willing to throw it all onto the altar, the sacrificial altar of war, to the gods of war, to the gods of incremental territorial advance. So places like Avdiivka or Krinky or up in Kupiansk, they will send waves and waves of both humans and mechanized equipment to try and eke out each subsequent meter of territory. They are okay with that because they have massive stockpiles. You've seen the satellite imagery of all the equipment they have back in Russia, and they're also pulling equipment from everywhere. So they used to have a lot of equipment on the sort of western borders of Russia, along like if you like, the European NATO kind of borders. A lot has been pulled from there, even though he said he's going to just create this Leningrad military district to answer Finland joining the NATO coalition, and also the US using bases in Finland. So he's going to create this new military district, but he doesn't have the troops or equipment to do so. But there have traditionally been a lot of equipment up there that's been pulled down to Ukraine. There's also traditionally been a lot of equipment along the Chinese border. In fact, apparently more so. So the Chinese border is one that apparently Russia was, and this is what Jonathan Fink, I think, was saying the other day, Russia was far more cognizant of the threat of China than actually the threat from the West. And so there was a lot of equipment lined up along there. You pull that down. All this stuff that can be refurbished, all these barrels that can be cannibalized. The question is, how long can that last? So there's talking cranky of there being like 950 bits of equipment around the Dnipro, in the Dnipro grouping. Well, Russia have lost a huge number of pieces of equipment around there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 200 bits of equipment around there now. But actually, they've still got a whole load. In fact, there's talk that they've gone up from 850 to 950. And so they can lose this amount of equipment and still get away with it. The only question is, how long can that go on before they reach a critical tipping point? So lots of you are saying, wow, these figures on a daily basis, you're like, I can't believe they're still going. But actually, so therefore, the go-to reasoning is that these aren't accurate. But I would say they probably are broadly accurate. It's just that Russia has that much stuff. Okay. Sorry for that long ramble. 920 personnel losses is another day of huge losses. 27 tanks and 42 armored personnel vehicles is massive. Like, there is no doubt about it. You take, as I keep saying, even if you take a third off that, they're still losing, you know, up around about 30 APVs. They're still losing 18 tanks. You take a third off that. These are phenomenal numbers. 15 artillery systems is kind of average, actually, for recent times. Although artillery has actually slipped down over the last week or two, to be quite frank. one multiple launch rocket system, one anti-aircraft warfare system. Don't know what that anti-aircraft warfare system is yet. Then we move on really to 40 vehicles and fuel tanks, a heavy hit on Russian logistics there, and 7 pieces of special equipment. So these are huge numbers that will count towards, will expedite that tipping point. When will that tipping point be reached? I don't know. When will that critical mass of losses be reached? I don't know. But days like this are good for the Ukrainians. So when we go onto Andrew Perpetua's loss list and you think, holy cow, that's another day of 7-1 losses, Russian to Ukrainian losses. And he tries to skew towards looking at Russian sources to try and make sure he's not biased against the Russians. But yet here we are. Okay, the Ukrainians have lost a couple of tanks, bit of surveillance equipment, a couple of bits of artillery, nothing particularly huge there in terms of value, but the Russians have lost, oh my goodness, just look at the tanks. So we have a ship here that has been sunk. That is the training vessel that's been added to the large landing ship that was indicated yesterday. So that is now 2 vessels that Andrew Perpetua thinks he's got evidence of sinking. Then we have tanks, and basically you've got every type of tank listed here. Certainly every type of new tank. I mean, actually not many there are 3 unknown tanks, 4 unknown tanks, but other than that, there are no T-62s, T-55s, none of the older ones. These are T-72s, T-80s, and a couple of T-90s thrown in for short measure as well. One with a mine roller there. So 2 T-90Ms, the latest version, the latest tank that the Russians utilize. It's a massive loss of tanks. I mean, goodness me, count that up. That's 5, 10, 15, that's 20 tanks by the looks of it there. Incredible numbers. Infantry fighting vehicles, mainly BMP-2s and 3s and some BMDs, a couple of BMP-1s at the end there. But as I've said before, skewing towards later vehicles for the reasons I've already given. And then civilians and unknown trucks. Only a couple there, to be honest. That's probably the lowest number of civilian military trucks and equipment that I've seen. And some question marks here for just vehicles that he doesn't know. So Andrew Perpetua often on Twitter goes, can anyone help me tell me what this is? So they're so pixelated. The equipment it's usually from FPV drones that are sending their recording back to the operator, and the operator has to screen record it because that gets lost. So the memory card on board the FPV drone will be lost necessarily. So it hasn't. You have only kind of screen recording capabilities, which means that the footage that's sent back to the operator is usually less quality. Quality is poorer, and the recording of the screen will give you poorer quality stuff. So when Andrew Perpetua comes along to then try and work out what it is that's being blown up, he's like, well, this is just a pixelated mess. I can't really work it out. Or it's something that's been so fundamentally blown up that you just don't know what it was. As an example of this coming, but we do know what it was because you saw it before. But imagine trying to work out what it was just from like the wheels, which you can do. But anyway, when we look at evidence to support this, I mean, I'm showing you still from this video. This video is just dead bodies lying everywhere in Krinky. Now, of course, the arguments are that there are going to be these videos for the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians aren't really using huge amounts of mechanized equipment in their defense. So in Krinky, there is no mechanized equipment they can get across the river. So it is just like 200 troops against all of these Russians attacking them. And the damage being done isn't necessarily from those 200 troops. That's almost like, and I hate to say this, but it's almost like baiting the Russians in. So you bait them with the 200 troops, and then you hit the Russians with your drones. And so Magyar in the area is incredibly, has been incredibly successful in degrading the Russian forces. And here is some drone footage of just dead bodies lying everywhere, destroyed vehicles here, there, and all around. It's just incredible. So Getty says, Krinky left bank assault the Russians to push out the Ukrainian forces from the bridgehead has turned into massacres. I hope the citizens of Russia are watching all these videos to see how Putin is sending their men to early deaths. There are so many videos to support these figures that I could show you that I can't show you because I get restricted. Here's another one. Right, this is OSINT Technical this morning. Comes out with over recent months, Russian mechanized forces have mounted a disastrous push across open ground north of Vodyeny. mapped out the recent Russian losses, so these are recent losses, with at least 27 vehicles across 2 fields north of the town, destroyed by accurate Ukrainian anti-tank guided missiles and artillery fire. Let me just repeat that to you. 27 vehicle losses in 2 fields. 2 fields across a whole front line of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fields. Just 2 fields gives you 27 Russian pieces of equipment lost in recent times. It's phenomenal. This video blew me away. So this is on P-Star11, so PS01. You can go and find these. These are all linked in my description, in the description to this video, so that you can go and watch these and get an idea of what's going on. So the Russian 810th Marines are being decimated near Krinky. Staggering amount of BTR losses in the assault and in the retreat. Now, that may sound like an exaggeration, but honestly, there is a staggering amount of BTR losses. These BTRs with these wheels, these armed personnel carriers, are being heavily used in the Krinky area and heavily lost. My goodness, this is a video. This is 1.5 minutes of just another BTR blown up. That's another one disabled. That's another one with its hatch open with a drone flying into it. That's another one taken out. That's definitely blown up. There's another one. There's another one hitting a mine. There's another. Just, my goodness. And apparently what drones are also doing are dropping magnetic mines, I believe, around this area. So the Ukrainians are doing that quite a bit at the moment, that then will attach themselves to the cars and blow them up, to the vehicles and blow them up. This is another one that I can't show you, but you can check it out below. FPV of a 47th Brigade of Ukraine makes a Russian BTR disappear. So this is a BTR 82A next to, it looks like a tank. And they hit the BTR. And that one drone, I don't know what type of drone it was, what type of munition it was, but my goodness, that BTR just disintegrates. The whole thing blows and it zooms out. So the spotter drone, parts of that BTR fly like 100 meters that way. It's an incredible bit of footage. And you're like, there's BTR that is fundamentally disassembled. And that's when you go back to, like, when you're trying to work out what these vehicles are and all you see is a molten hulk of something. You're like, I'm not quite sure what that was. Probably a BTR. It's got wheels, like we know that. So, it can be quite difficult to work out what has been blown up. Indeed, like, check out the Maxar imagery that's now coming out of the Rapucha class landing ship that was taking out Feodosia. So we know definitely now that ship is the one that was hit, and that ship is no longer a ship. There it was before, there it is now. There it was before, there it is now. Yeah, it really did blow up. And actually, Trent Telenko's done an explosion analysis of that. I mean, there is 11 tweets of him doing that analysis. I'm not going to read you that. Just a TLDR, the too long didn't read version of it, or as in the armed forces you say, bluff, BLUF. There weren't enough shell or rocket munitions to account for blast damage seen in Feodosia. So you look at the blast damage, you see that parts of the ship landed 650 meters away. You work out from looking at all of that evidence what must have been on board to cause that kind of blast radius, to cause that size of explosion. And he says the claims of the ammunition shells and the gimlet and the multiple launch rockets, those numbers don't account for the size of the explosion. So he says there must have been many hundreds of Shahed 136 drones in the Novocherkassk when she was storm shadowed. She was used to move Shaheds in the same way the USS Indianapolis was used to move the A-bomb in World War II for security reasons. Russian Armed Forces security, that AFU signals, cyber and human intelligence penetrated. The lack of these Shaheds in Crimean launch sites will affect Russia's military plans to attack Odessa and the Ukrainian power grid this winter. Now, that's his analysis. He says that Shaheds are now one point of interest from his analysis is that, where do we have it here? That Shahed drones, no, it's not that one, have now got thermobaric warheads on them. Yeah, here it is. The Russians recently upgraded their Shaheds with 40 kilograms of thermobaric warheads shown below. A bunch of these in a Novocherkassk's hold would certainly amp up the blast. We don't have a drone number here, so I'll come back to that down the thread. So you can go and check his analysis of that. But he says that he reckons there were definitely Shaheeds on board. Right, Mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, reports that partisans have destroyed the railway bridge near Svitolonetska or something for a second time. After it was initially blown up, Russians decided to repair it, after which it was destroyed once again. So partisans are active around Melitopol doing the things. They're active in Mariupol as well. Those are two of the hotspots for partisan activity. Right, time for a sip of tea. So moving on to distant strikes, here we have 7 out of the 8 Shaheeds shot down last night. So relatively quiet night, and that's the smallest Shaheed wave attack that we've seen for some time. There's been at least sort of 20 shot on most nights, maybe the teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s. Well, actually, 8 Shaheeds sent is not that much, and 7 of those were taken out. So again, why would they only send that many? What's the reasoning for the Russians sending only that many then? And can we look at something like the landing ship being blown up and having a haul of Shaheeds inside, and suddenly those Shaheeds are not able to be utilized? Could be. Right, as Tim White said, it's been a very quiet start to the day today, but there was a lot of activity last night. To review anything, you can check out his previous threads, and actually we're gonna dip into some of what he said. So well, here we have already tragedy and killing in Ukraine again this morning by Russia. This is in Vovchansk, just 5 kilometers inside Ukraine in the Kharkiv region. Anti-aircraft missiles struck and this car was destroyed. So the claim is that something like an S-300 or similar missile was used. One woman in her 60s was killed, another severely wounded, and it's just more example of the sorts of activities the Russians are involved in. It just seems pretty egregious as far as I'm concerned. There had been repeated attacks on Odessa recently. Odessa endured a relentless 7-hour attack. This was yesterday. 12 Shahed drones were intercepted, so this isn't from last night, but this is over the previous 24 hours. I just wanted to reiterate that it's Odessa and Kherson that are the places that Russia seek to take revenge upon for the blowing up of the ship and for the downing of those planes. 12 Shahed drones were intercepted with debris hitting residential buildings. 1 person killed, 4 injured, including a 4-year-old child. Stand strong, Odessa. Right, what's interesting about the drones that I was reading in Language Learner's analysis of what's happened recently, and he is saying that the drones take this route over residential areas. So if they are shot down, they will land and still do damage on residential areas. So rather than having the drones maybe make the most direct route to a place that might be over fields, if they take a route over residential areas, so that's often we hear that they are taking strangled, circuitous routes, and you're thinking, is that because they're trying to smoke out air defenses? It could well be. But also it could be that they're trying to go over places that have the most effect if they're shot down. So rather than over fields, they're going to send them over civilian infrastructure. You necessarily have to shoot them down. They fall on people's houses and blow them up. Yeah, nice. And in Kherson, the destruction continues. As according to Tim White, the post office was damaged in Zolota Balka to the north of the region. Russia fired 400 shells in the last 24 hours, killing 1 and wounding 7. One couple showed the damage, but they were lucky. So 400 shells, and this is happening to people. They are bombing residential areas. This is what Russia are doing. Right, what are Ukraine doing? Well, Krasnopokrovsk, which is the northwestern entrance onto Crimea. I was talking about how if you blew up the Kerch, the Henichevsk bridge, and the bridges at Chonhar, and you could take out the route in by basically Krasnopokrovsk. I think that must be where this is. Then you would effectively blockade Crimea. All those routes into Crimea. It's relatively easy to cut Crimea off because once you've taken out bridges, there is only that one area where you can get into and off Crimea. And this is where Ukraine appear to have been focusing last night. And there's a series of explosions also rang out in Sevastopol. I believe the Kerch Bridge was also closed again last night. So the Ukrainians are continually trying to hit targets in Crimea. And though we don't know what was hit and what damage was done, we can imagine that given they could fairly easily hit the landing ship next to an S-400 in Feodosia, that possibly things have been successfully targeted, acquired, and taken out in Crimea, but I don't know the details. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Russian accounting network 1C Raurus was hacked. So it's one of the largest ERP systems in Russia, so it's sort of a payment system. It has 150,000 users, among them Russian technology corporations and war sponsors. Clients will no longer be able to use accounting services and work at full capacity. For example, gas stations and stores in Russia no longer have cash registers. This is some really effective hacking from the Ukrainians in response to some of the Russian hacking that has been taking place quite a lot recently, certainly with regards to Kyivstar, the mobile phone operator, which then affects things like payments. So if you can't have Wi-Fi and mobile phone data whizzing around, then you can't do things like cashless payments and so on and so forth in many places in Ukraine. So that has heavily affected Ukraine. On the other hand, Ukraine have hit the pension services. They hit, what did they hit recently? Something else as well. I forget, some network. And then here we've got this payment network being taken out by hackers. So that could be pretty useful. German investigators have identified Russian soldiers responsible for killing civilians in Hostomel. So this is right at the beginning of the war, when the Russians just were committing war crimes from the get-go. In 2022, Russian elite airborne troops landed in the city, attempting to quickly capture Kiev. However, due to a successful Ukrainian defense, the assault failed. But it didn't stop the Russians from taking it out on civilians, and it was pretty appalling. And of course, Bucha, we know, was also another example of terrible Russian activities. But anyway, German investigators have been doing their work there, and I'm sure that'll be winging its way to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Right, Scott Ritter here is just spouting more nonsense. And he says, well, I mean, in 2024, I think we'll see the continued strategic defeat of Ukraine by Russia. It's just, I mean, we can just dismiss Scott Ritter as a Russian shill. He's married to a pro-Russian Georgian woman, and he is entirely compromised as far as I'm concerned, and he's in the pocket of the Kremlin. Well, if you remember, he previously said, I don't know if it's on here, but he said that the war would end last autumn. He keeps saying, Russia will win. Russia's just about to win. They're going to win. It's a bit like Colonel McGregor. These people should not be paid attention to at all. I know I'm paying attention to him, but I'm communicating to you that you shouldn't. So Sputnik, who's a Russian source, saying Scott Ritter on the likelihood that Russia will enter into the conflict with NATO after Ukraine, and then spouting his nonsense that the war's going to be over, Russia will prevail in 2024. He's said that many times before, and he abjectly failed. How about he talks about how he's failed, rather than doing what Harold Camping did with the kind of, oh my goodness, the world is going to end, the rapture. Oh, it's going to end on October, whenever it was. Oh, it didn't. Oh, we got the date wrong. It's going to end here. Oh, it didn't. We got the date wrong. Actually, the world's going to end now. Oh, no, it hasn't. That's Scott Ritter. Well, okay. My conclusion then is you're talking BS, and I don't need to believe anything you say again because, don't cry wolf. But except this time, I just don't think there will be the wolf coming and eating the sheep. I just think you're forever going to be crying wolf. Right. So this is Dmitry Medvedev. He, as Tim White says, oh dear, sleepy demons woken up in the Kremlin Durdom madhouse. The ex-president noticed, so he's a former president, posted this, this is a translation of his Telegram post. So for any Russian lickspittles, Republican supporters, etc., proposing peace talks, please note that the terrorist state still openly wants to overthrow democracy and take Kyiv. This is really important to note this, right? Anyone that is calling, and we are starting to see newspaper articles reflect this. We are starting to see politicians around the world reflect this as well. This call for this appeasement strategy by calling for peace talks. Medvedev is clearly telling you what Russia want to do. So let's read what he says. Question from the RAA Novosti agency. The collective West, having spent almost all its weapons, really has it, began to push the Kiev regime to negotiations in 2024. Is this possible? So the answer. So Medvedev, can we do peace negotiations? He himself says, what about negotiations in 2024? Everything is quite obvious. One, special operation will continue. Its goal will remain the disarmament of Ukrainian troops and a rejection of the current Ukrainian state from the ideology of neo-Nazism. In other words, we will destroy the army. They will be demilitarized, as they previously said, and when we talk about denazification, that means there will be a regime change. So there will be a governmental. We will get rid of the Zelensky government. So it's very openly saying this. Two, the removal of the ruling Bandera regime. So doubling down on that is clearly not declared, but the most important and inevitable goal that must and will be achieved. In other words, we will get rid of the Zelensky regime. So doubling down on that. Three, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv, Kiev, and are Russian cities. So those are a bunch of cities that have not yet been taken. So Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kiev. 5 cities that have not yet been taken will be taken. They are Russian cities. All of them are still marked in yellow-blue on paper maps and on electronic tablets. It's very clearly setting out the goals for what the Russians are trying to achieve, which is to take back Kiev. And so, yes, negotiations, scare quotes, negotiations are, of course, possible. Russia has never rejected them, unlike the crazy Ukrainian authorities. Such negotiations are not limited by time. They can continue until the complete defeat and capitulation of the Bandera troops of the North Atlantic Alliance. And by the way, I want to inform you that since January the 1st, 2023, 500,000 people have been accepted for contract service in the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Look, we've mobilized 500,000 people. We're going to win this war and we're going to take Kiev. So you can talk about negotiations all you like. We can keep having negotiations, but we're going to take Kiev and Odessa and Kharkiv and Mykolaiv and. Why are we talking about peace negotiations when this is what the Russians are openly saying their intentions are? Meanwhile, in free and fair elections Russia, as we know it, someone upset Putin? A councillor from the Tsar's United Russia Party, actually he's running as an independent now, I think, Putin, for some reason decided to fall out of a window in Tobolsk. Vladimir Egorov was just 46. His body was discovered earlier today. Just window safety in Russia is questionable. Right. All the while, Zelensky's been getting on. General Zelensky's been getting on trying to defend Ukraine. It turns out he has a bit too much free time on his hands. He's been able to complete his PhD. So Shashank Joshi from The Economist, defense correspondent, says, I couldn't finish my PhD thesis because I was far too busy. Valery Zelensky, commander-in-chief of Ukraine during an existential war, defends his law PhD thesis on a secret topic. So Zelensky defends his law PhD thesis on a secret topic. That's where you go and you have to sit in front of a panel and defend your thesis, so on and so forth. He's doing that. Every PhD student has long fantasized about the ability to forcibly draft their committee and send them to the other side of the Dnipro. So Shashank Joshi, joshing here, one might say, that PhD students have fantasized about the committee that evaluates your thesis and you have to defend it to them. Yeah, I'd just like to mobilize them to the front line. Of course, no one's able to do that. Literally, Zelensky can. Anyway, I digress. Ben Hodges, this isn't news, but yet again, he's on the money. I agree with Norbert Rutkin. Russia's only advantage is mass. It is those troops that Medvedev was just talking about. The surest way to undermine Russian mass is to destroy Russian HQs, logistics, and artillery. Long-range precision strike capability that can reach every corner of Russian-occupied Ukraine will make that possible. Yes, it's what I've been saying forever, or at least since the grinding down of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. You aren't going to win this war on those front lines. Eventually, they'll have to be taken, but you have to so thoroughly degrade the other side. And this applies to Russia as well as it does to Ukraine. If you want to prevail, you have to absolutely hammer the opposition in the ways that hurt really bad. So in terms of Ukraine, you're going to be hitting logistics, you're going to be hitting bridges, you're going to be hitting landing ships, you're going to be taking the Black Sea Fleet out of it, you're going to be taking air bases out with ATACMs, you're going to be doing all these things. But what Ukraine have done, that needs to be multiplied by 30, really. And it can't be once a month that these big, huge places are hit. That needs to be every night. They need to be sending waves and waves of missiles, obliterating the Russian ability to prosecute this war. And that's what Hodges is saying. That's what I've been saying, and it's the way forward, is my opinion. So, and that can be helped by the US. Predominantly, they have the most of this stuff, but also Europe can come together and help. So, one of the co-leader of the Green Party, who are in coalition in Germany, has come out and said, actually, Europe can't replace the US in terms of and we'll talk about this in the next video, in terms of provision of weaponry. But actually, they can if the will is there. So they can by ramping up production. They can't in stockpiles. America craps on everyone in the world in terms of military stockpiles. But in terms of ramping up production, if there's a will, then there is a way. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care. Speak soon.